DT Story welcomes you today. We will bring you a very interesting story. Let's wait and see. I woke up to the sound of laughter, loud voices, and the irresistible aroma of freshly baked bread drifting through my open window. It could have been a delightful way to start the day, if I weren't a single guy living alone with no bakery anywhere nearby. Puzzled, I threw on a t-shirt and shuffled toward my backyard, half expecting to find raccoons hosting some bizarre celebration. Instead, I was met with a full-blown farmer's market sprawled across my property. Tents, stalls, banners, and at least 100 people milled about, browsing organic honey and handcrafted candles. A man in overalls was even selling fresh eggs right on my lawn. I blinked. Was I losing it? Had I somehow launched a business in my sleep? Then I spotted her, the source of nearly all my neighborhood woes. Linda, the HOA president, self-proclaimed guardian of petty rules, and now, apparently, the mastermind behind this unauthorized bazaar. She stood near the entrance, welcoming visitors like a feudal lord surveying her domain. I marched over, sidestepping a woman tasting goat cheese, and cleared my throat. "Linda, what in the world is this?" She turned with a wide, artificial smile. "Oh, Mark, good morning. Isn't it fantastic? Our very own community farmers market." I waved my arms at the chaos, my brain still scrambling to catch up. "You set up a farmer's market on my property?" Linda scoffed. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It was just sitting here, totally unused. We figured, why let good land go to waste?" "We?" I echoed, incredulous. "Who's we?" "The HOA, of course," she replied breezily. "We organized everything. And don't worry, it's all for a good cause. A portion of the proceeds goes to community projects." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache brewing. "Linda, you can't just take my land and turn it into a commercial venture." She dismissed me with a wave. "Oh, don't be selfish, Mark. Think of the local businesses, the artisans, the charming rustic vibe." I took a deep breath, trying not to lose it in front of a group of older women inspecting homemade jams. "Linda, did you even ask me? Did you get permits? This is private property." Her smile tightened, but she kept it plastered on. "Oh, don't be such a spoilsport. Technically, the HOA has jurisdiction over neighborhood spaces, and this is an enhancement for everyone. It's not like you were using the land." I scanned the scene, realizing the vendors had no clue they were part of a hostile takeover. Some even smiled at me, likely assuming I was a supportive landowner. My fists clenched. I could storm City Hall and shut this down, but then a wicked, perfectly legal idea hit me. I almost grinned. "All right, Linda," I said, forcing my tone to stay even. "You're right. I wasn't using the land, and this does seem profitable." Her eyes gleamed with smug triumph. "Exactly. I knew you'd come around." I smiled back. "Yeah, and since it's my land, I suppose I should start charging rent for every stall." The color drained from Linda's face. "Excuse me." I crossed my arms. "Seems fair, right? You're using my property for commerce, so I'll bill each vendor a reasonable market rate." Linda sputtered. You can't do that. This is a community event." I shrugged. "On private property. My private property." She straightened, nostrils flaring. "The HOA won't allow it." I leaned in slightly. "The HOA doesn't own this land." "I do." She opened her mouth, shut it, then spun on her heel and stormed off, muttering about consulting legal. I watched her go, barely stifling a laugh. Game on. If Linda wanted to profit off my land, she'd have to pay, or face the consequences. She'd underestimated me, and I was ready to prove it. That day, I dove into research, property rights, zoning laws, everything I needed to dismantle her little empire. The more I uncovered, the more absurd it became. Linda hadn't secured a single permit, and the land was unequivocally mine, no gray areas. This wasn't just trespassing, it was commercial fraud with a side of arrogance. The next morning, armed with a stack of documents, deeds, regulations, state laws on unpermitted businesses, I brewed a fresh coffee and strolled back to the market with a spring in my step. Vendors were setting up, oblivious to the storm brewing. Linda, predictably, was at the entrance, chatting with a woman selling lavender soap. When she saw me, her smile wavered. "Mark," she said in a forced chipper tone, "I hope you're here to enjoy the market, not stir up pointless drama." I sipped my coffee, savoring the moment. Oh, I'm here to enjoy it, all right. In fact, I love it so much I've decided to officially take over as landlord. Her face twitched. Excuse me. I pulled out my papers. Since this is my land, I can legally charge rent for every stall. And since you didn't bother with permits, you've landed yourself in a real mess. The soap vendor glanced between us. Wait, what? You don't own this land. Linda forced a laugh. Don't be ridiculous. The HOA has authority over community projects. I shook my head. Nice try, but HOA authority doesn't trump private property laws. You can't hijack someone's land for your own gain. But don't worry, I'm happy to fix this. Vendors can keep operating if they sign a rental agreement with me. The soap vendor frowned. So the HOA isn't the landlord? Nope, I said, handing her a document. I am. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Vendors paused their setup, suddenly engrossed. A woman selling produce stepped forward. Hold on, we've been paying fees to Linda for our spots. I shot Linda a look. Oh, really? Her lips thinned. That's just a small community contribution. I grinned. Funny, because it sounds like you've been pocketing cash for something you don't own. That could be fraud. The crowd grew, vendors glaring at Linda with rising suspicion. The egg guy crossed his arms. So where's our money going? Linda's face flushed. To community projects and maintenance, and your pocket. I finished. She looked ready to erupt. This is outrageous. You can't just swoop in and take over. I pulled out another paper. Actually, I can. I've consulted a lawyer. Vendors either pay me or they're trespassing. Oh, and I've got the city inspector on speed dial. An unpermitted market? Fines for everyone. The murmurs turned to panic. Vendors whispered, phones out, probably Googling the laws I'd cited. Linda's grip on the situation was slipping, and it was glorious. All right, I said, clapping my hands. Let's keep this simple. I'm offering every vendor a rental contract with me. Fair rates, no hidden fees, just a legit agreement. Sign today, and I'll have the first month. The soap vendor didn't hesitate. Give me the paperwork. Linda nearly shrieked. You can't be serious. He shrugged. If I'm paying, I'd rather pay the guy who owns the land. One by one, vendors lined up. Linda's power crumbled as I signed up over half the market. The rest wavered, but her reign was done. I leaned close, voice low. You really thought you could steal my land and win? Bad move. Her fists clenched. This isn't over. I grinned. I know. That's what makes it fun. She stormed off, likely hunting for a non-existent HOA loophole. I watched, basking in petty justice. Not only had I turned her scheme into my profit, but I'd flipped it entirely. And I wasn't finished. Linda wasn't one to surrender quietly. I knew that when she marched off, eyes blazing, hands balled so tight I thought she'd break something. She'd lost her market, and she wouldn't take it lying down. I expected a meltdown. What I got was better. Next morning, as I sipped coffee and watched my new tenants set up in my now legal market, a white city vehicle rolled up. I didn't need to guess. Linda had called in reinforcements, hoping to bury me in red tape. I almost pitied her. Almost. A middle-aged man in a safety vest stepped out, clipboard in hand. I set my mug down and sauntered over, playing the concerned owner. Morning. How can I help? He nodded politely. Got a complaint about an unauthorized commercial operation on private property. I whistled. Wow, someone must hate small businesses. He smirked. We get these all the time, but we have to check. Linda materialized, glee in her eyes. Yes, you do. I'm so glad someone's finally investigating this. She shot me a victorious look. I told you, Mark, you can't run a business without authorization. I raised an eyebrow. You're right, Linda. That's why I got permits this morning. Her face fell so fast I wished I'd filmed it. I handed the inspector my papers with a grin. He skimmed them, nodding. Everything's in order. Owner has rights to lease. Permits are valid. You're good. Linda twitched. That can't be right. He just set this up. Sure did, I said. Unlike some, I follow the law. The inspector returned my papers and turned to Linda. Ma'am, got any actual violations to report? This looks legal. Her eyes darted wildly, landing on a stall. That tent's too close to the sidewalk. That's a violation. He sighed, measured it, and shook his head. No violation. Linda looked ready to combust. Then the best part happened. The inspector glanced at her house, frowning. Is that addition to her home up to code? Linda froze. What? He scribbled something, approaching her property. I didn't know what he'd spotted, but I wasn't stopping him. He peered at her deck. This wasn't in the original plans. Was a permit filed? Her voice was a whisper. It's just a small extension. He stared blankly. Did you get city approval? Silence. Beautiful, explosive silence. Linda floundered as vendors smirked. I leaned in, whispering, looks like you're the one with an unauthorized structure. She glared, practically vibrating with fury. The inspector finished his notes. You'll get a violation notice. Could mean demolition or big fines. Linda looked like she might cry. I patted her shoulder. Rules are rules, Linda. She swatted me away, muttering, and stomped inside. The inspector nodded at me, wished me a good day, and left. The vendors erupted in applause. Karma's fast, one laughed. Watching her rules backfire? Better than TV, another said. I waved it off, secretly thrilled. Linda had tried to sink me and sank herself instead. But it wasn't over. Over the next weeks, her fines mounted. The HOA distanced itself, stripping her of power. Her pristine home became a symbol of failure. Then, the kicker, a foreclosure notice. Between fines, legal fees, and who knows what, she couldn't keep up. The house hit the auction block. When I saw that notice, I knew my move. I bought it, cheap, thanks to its HOA baggage. The deed signed, I made my final play. I turned Linda's house into a public restroom for my market. The grand opening was glorious. Band, food trucks, the works. The sign read, Linda's Community Rest Stop. Clean stalls, pristine toilets, all legal. Linda had vanished before it opened, unable to face her castle's fate. No one knew where she went. No one cared. The market thrived under me, the neighborhood happier than ever. Passing the restroom sign where her front door once stood,